and welcome to the Zero Ends channel. Please like and subscribe. Please enjoy our live.
Welcome again to another reading. And this particular chapter, y'all gonna probably like the most. I think we all heard of the Nat Turner rebellions, and there was actually a book talking about Nat Turner's confessions, which I have not really looked into. But I know it exists. So for those who have read it or don't read it, I will still advocate to read it anyway because it does talk about certain confessions that he gave to the same, I guess, man that was want to know why he did what he did. I always tell you be careful of the other underlying propaganda that was, I think, was re-edited and by I think what's his name? It's a black writer. It slipped my mind. I forgot his name again. But y'all know who I'm talking about. Yeah, what's good? I'm trying to remember his name again. Ooh. If anybody knows his name, please write in the chat. But you know, he is a homosexual back in the early 20th century. He wrote books about, black people's situation, racism. If anybody knows his name, please tell me. I can't remember again. But like I said, yeah, he was one of those men that wrote to re-edit and put in the homosexual part of Nat Turner, proclaiming that he was gay, nonsense. But we all know not true at that time. And let's say if it was true, right? If they want to go by that narrative, right? What importance is that to mention that in his confessions? Or try to put that in his confessions to make up that? That was my number one question. And mind you, the confession of Nat Turner was republicized more than I think once. So if you never got the original confession of Nat Turner, if you get anything as a second or third edition, I think that's when they really edit and put that piece in it. Now mind you, this is what I heard. I can't say that it validated because I never read the Nat Turner confessions. But for the sake of conversation, be careful what you read. That's all I gotta say. You gotta be very careful. Be very careful. So as I find the page, we will begin. And like always, as you come in the stream or in the podcast, please like this video. And always leave a comment to every stream, every video of this podcast or any other broadcast to let me know how you feel, your expressions, your thoughts, feelings. And I will eventually reply back to those who, give the comments. So, and it depends on the comment, I will give you a reply back. So don't be hesitant. So I give people
less than a minute.
Then I'll begin. All right. As I begin, to let anybody know that's listening, if you have any response or comments as I'm streaming now, have you ever got a chance to go back to some of the previous broadcasts of the American Negro slave revolts? Let me know. All right. Let us begin. This is titled Chapter 12, The Turner Cataclysm. It has already been demonstrated that the decade preceding the Southampton insurrection was one of the economic depressions throughout the South, and in the Old South, especially Eastern Virginia and Eastern North Carolina. It was marked by a dangerous, disproportionating rate of population growth, that of the Negroes distinctly outstripping that of the whites. To completely the picture of environmental conditions, one should examine the specific locale of Turner's uprising. So, as you know, we're going further. Southampton is a tidewater county located in the southeastern part of Virginia, bordering the state of North Carolina, covered 600 square miles. It was an important economic unit in the Tidewaters areas. In 1830, it was second in the state in its production of potatoes and rice, and in 1840 was the leading county in cotton production in the valley of its orchard produce, and in its number of the swine. Its population trend was that of the section of a more rapid growth of the Negroes than of the white elements. Thus, one find that whites are while in 1800s there were 600, or actually 6,127 whites and 8,043 Negroes in Southampton County. In 1830, the figures read 6,574 whites and 9,501 Negroes. In 1830, out of the total of 39 Tidewaters counties, only 3 surpassed Southampton in the number of free Negroes, and only 4 in the number of slaves and in the number of whites. Now, let us pause right there for a second. Let's do a number. So in the period of, looks like roughly 30 years, there was a growth. So how many out of the Negroes, let's do the numbers. If there were 9,501 subtracted by 6,574, what's the ratio? You're looking at roughly almost 2,927 more Negroes than whites during that span of roughly 10 to 20 years, maybe 3. And as you know, like anything in warfare, numbers are very important. They always got to know how many numbers of Negroes, not only in this soil, but out the globe. Because obviously when you have more numbers, it becomes a problem, because now you don't want certain people to start get understanding of the game and awakening and want to take back control. So keep that in mind. Knowing that they control mostly of the Negro mind, they have to worry about his actions, but they always got to keep the numbers down as best as possible, because the more Negroes, the more the problem when anyone will be, let's say, get in their uppity mood. They don't want to be a slave during them times. In this economic decline, Southampton is also typically of the conditions in Eastern Virginia during the period. Thus, the example, it ranks 5th in the state in 1800 in the amount of taxes it paid on the assets valuation of its land and lot, but dropping to 44 in 1820 and to 46 in 1830. The situation then in the decades prior to the Southampton Revolt is one of the extraordinary malaise in the slaveholding eras. It is marked by considering expansion and deployment of anti-slavery feelings, nationality, and internationality. As part of an all-embracing upsurge of progressive and radical thoughts and actions throughout the Western world, by great and serious unrest among the slave population in the West Indies as well as on the continent by several economic depressions and by the more rapid growth of the Negro population and the whites through the Old South, testifying to the uneasiness of the master class, there appears numerous precautionary measurements for the purpose of over-raveling or further restricting of the activities of the slave population, which in turn very likely stimulate discontent. And as a last resort, in order to assure the speedy suppression of all evidence of slave insubordination, it was into such a situation one of the attempts to assert through our thought proof is of course not in land or not at hand, that it was because of such a situation that the uprising dark arms of vengeance of Turner and his followers crashed in the summer of 1831. Nat Turner was born October the 2nd, 1800, and apparently lived all his life in Southampton County. At the time of the rebellions, he was, and a side note here, which you could read for yourself, 5'6" or 8 inches high, weighed between 150 and 160 pounds, rather bright complexion, but not a mulatto. Broad shoulders, large flat nose, large eyes, broad flat feet, rather knock-knee, walks I think it's called brisket, and active hair, or an active hair on the top of the head, very thin, no beard except on the upper lip and the top of the chin, a scar on one of his temples, also one on the back of his neck, a large knot on one of his bones on his right arm near the wrist, produced by a blow. So, as you know, that's the description of Nat Turner. And I'm not sure if anybody else gave in his confessions what he looked like. But during that time, by other sources, they know what he actually looked like. So if you never heard it here, you heard it here first. Very natural, Williams Lloyd Garrison, in commenting upon this description, pointed to those scars as important explanation for Turner's actions. But the Richmond Inquiry assures its readers that Turner got 2 of his bruises in fights with fellow slaves, and one of them that of his temple, though a mule kick. Jury, notwithstanding the fact that his description of Turner hardly indicate a pergracious individual, accept the explanation of the Southern newspaper and point out correctly that Turner himself stated that his last master, Joseph Travis, had not been severe, but he had had other masters, Benjamin Turner, Putman Monroe, and he had in 1826 or 1827 run away from one of these after a change in overseers. However, that may be more personal vengeance was not Nat Turner's motive. He had learned how to read precisely when he did not know, and when his labor permitted, he had immersed himself in the stories of the Bible. He was a keen, mechanical gift man whose religion offers him a rationalization for his opposition to the status quo. Later writers have described him as an overseer or foreman, and while no convictions of supported for this has been found, it is certain that his considerable mental ability were recognized and appreciated by his contemporaries. He was a religious leader, often conducted service of a Baptist nature, and exhorted his follower workers. It appears that even white people were influenced, if not controlled, by him, so that, as he said, he immersed one either heard T. Bailey and prevail upon him to cease from his work wickedness. So they quote. Turner became convinced that he was obtained for some great purpose in the hands of the Almighty. In the spring of 1828, while working in the fields, he heard a loud noise in the heavens, and the spirits instantly appeared to me and said, the serpent was loosening, and Christ had laid down the yoke he had borne for the sins of men, and that I should take it on and fight against the serpent. For the time was fast approaching when the first should be the last, and the last should be the first. You know, that's a Bible verse. The slave waited for a sign from his God. This came to him in the form of a solar eclipse of February 12th, 1831. And there's a subtitle on the bottom that deals more of Nat Turner, which you can read for yourself. Then, apparently, for the first time, he told 4 other slaves of his plans for rebellion. All joined him, and these American Negroes selected the 4th of July as the day of which to strike for liberty and choice, which led a later commentary to curse them because they had perverted that sacred day. Turner was ill on the scarred day, and the conspirators waited for another sign. This appeared to them on Saturday, August the 13th, in the greenish blue color of the sun. According to Drury, Turner the next day exhorted at a religious meeting of Negroes in the southern parts of Southampton County, not in North Carolina, as has been said, where some of the slaves significated their willingness to cooperate with him by wearing around their necks red bandanas, handkerchiefs. There was certainly a meeting of plotting in the afternoon of Sunday, August the 21st, and it was then decided to start the revolt and that evening. And as y'all know, a lot of times of certain revolutions usually happen roughly around the summertime, I believe, on the average. But like I said, those were the times at that time when certain revolts happened mostly. Appreciating the value of a dramatic entrance, Turner was the last to join this gathering. He noticed a newcomer in the group and declared, and this is what he quote, I salute them on coming up and ask, how came be there? Be answered, his life was worth no more than others, and his liberty as dear to him. I asked him if he meant to obtain it. He said he would or loosen his life. This was enough to put him in full confidence. These 6 slaves then started out in the evening of August 21st, 1831, on their crusade against bondage. Their first blow, delivered by Turner himself, struck against persons and families of Turner's master, Joseph Travis, who were killed. Some arms and horses were taken. The rebellions pushed on, and everywhere slaves flocked to their standard, a result which Turner started out with but a handful of followers must have had excellent reasons to anticipate. Within 24 hours, approximately 70 slaves were actively aiding in the rebellion, or what do you call rebellion. By the morning of August 23rd, at least 57 whites, even women and children, had been killed, and the rebellion had covered about 20 miles. And there's a subtitle to this one. Maybe I should read the subtitle since I'm on this. Let's look closer. The confessions of the priests, especially Richmond Inquiry and Richmond Whig, are the basic source for the proceeding of the rebellion itself, bearing in mind, of course, that all are hostile to the cause of Turner's expose. No attempts will be made to detail these, since accuracy is impossible. Moreover, Drury made the attempt in 4 pages, and in his account entered the realm of fantasy, and when he declares, and this is page 35, that one infant was temporarily spared because it sweetly smiled as it ascends a search for Joseph Travis, name and land of property books were unsuccessful. However, Joseph Travis was married in Southampton County on October the 5th, 1829, to Sarah W. Monroe, perhaps the widow of Putman Monroe, a former owner of Nat Turner, MS, marriage registered Southampton in 1750 to 1853. Part 2, page 402. The Southampton Land Book for 1831 does like a Benjamin Travis, as the owner of 250 acres worth within the building about $695, some 15 miles north of Jerusalem. A Peg Travis owner of 2 acres of land worth $24 is also listed. It was later claimed that some of these slaves were forced to join. This is possible, though Turner never now were mentioned anything like that. As Thomas Wentworth Higginson pointed out, Nat Turner insurrection of the Atlantic Monthly of 8. It was to be expected that once the movement had been crushed, that would be offered as an extensionary circumstance. Neither contemporary nor later contemporaries agree as to the number of casualties or of discrepancies. Especially great the number of rebellions. Detailed evidence for the estimate made above cover several pages of the press, writers, master's thesis. Nat Turner Revolt, Columbia University, 1930. Well, actually, that's 1937. The death alone met the victims of the slaves' vengeance, and the wrath of historians find great difficulty in according for the fact that, so far as the evidence shown, there was no instance of rape or attempt rape by Turner's followers. R. Elwison is reduced to saying, remembering the brutal passion of the Negroes, we can only account for. Now, when I read that little section, subpar section from paragraphs 1 to 2, 3, because with any revolt, there are serious casualties where the historian will give a vague number, how many casualties, but they never really know because they were never there at that time, as everybody know. They only go by the bodies and what was claimed, how many were dead during this rebellion by Nat Turner. There was no rape. So when they talk about this thing about the black man wants to, rape, they don't have the same mindset as the non-blacks, Europeans, And what I mean that mindset like that during them time, because if we look at regular world history, the European history, lack of better words, what's evident, what is shown when he comes to new land or territory, what are three what are the three stages of colonization? Rape, plunder, pillage. And throughout his history, when he explored the world, when he got a chance to explore the world, that's what he done. Batman has not shown no evidence, even during a time when he was conditioned to be a slave back then, and even some now, today. You don't see when he rebels that he wants an inclinations to sit there after he goes and takes his frustrations on, you know, children and men, women, also. He doesn't go in and start raping. That's not in his psychology. And really that proves this right here. During the, not only in that terms rebellions, but other rebellions that slaves took during them time. But let's continue. Turner declared that indiscriminately slaughter was not their intention after they obtained a foothold, and was resorted to the first instance to strike terror and alarm. Women and children would afterwards have been spared, and men too who ceased to resist. According to Governor John Floyd, the slaves spared but one family, and that was one of the rich, as to be in all respect upon a par with them. In the morning of the 23rd, Turner and his followers set out for the county seat of Jerusalem, where there was a considerable store of arms. When about 3 miles from the town, several of the slaves, notwithstanding Turner's objections, insisted upon trying to recruit the slaves of a wealthy planter named Parker. Isn't that funny? Nate Parker played Nat Turner in the movie Reformation back in 2016, I believe. Yeah. Turner, with a handful of followers, remained at the park gate while the rest went to the home itself. Above half a mile away, once at the park home, many of the slaves appear to have slacked their first form. It was well-stocked cellars. And there's also a subtitle here, which you can read for yourself. And to have rested, Turner became impatient and set out to get his tardy companion. The 8th or the 9th slave remained at the gate, were then attacked by voluntary corps of whites of about twice their numbers. The slaves retreated by upon being reinforced by returning Turner and his men. The rebellious press on the force of whites to give around, and the whites to give ground. The later, however, were in turn reinforced by a company of militants and the Negroes, whose guns, according to the Richmond compiler of August 29th, were not fit for use, fled. Though Turner later tried to round up significant followers to continue the struggle, his efforts were futile, and this battle at Parker Field was the crucial one. Late in the day of this encounter, the commander of Fort Monroe, Colonel Ezustis, was requested by the mayor of Norfolk to send aid. By the morning of the 24th, 3 companies of auxiliary with a field piece and 100 stand of spare arms, together with detachments of men from the warships Warrant and Natasha, were on their way to the scenes of the trouble. They made the 6 mile in one day and met hundreds of other soldiers from volunteers and militants, companies of the country. in Virginia and in North Carolina surrounding Southampton. Massacres follow. Phillips simply notes a certain number of incidents blacks shot down, and Balgage asserts a must impartial trial was given to all except a few decapitized in Southampton. While Drury thought there was far less of this indiscriminate murder than might have been expected. Just how much indiscriminate murders one ought to expect is not clear, but the statements by General Epps to offer in commands of the effective county lead one to believe that these historians were rather uncritical in dealing with the phase of the events. He, the general, will not signify all of the incidents that he is bound to believe have occurred, but pass in silence, and what has happened with the expression of the deepest sorrow that may necessarily should be supposed to have existed to justify a single act of atrocity. But he feels himself bound to declare and thereby announce to the troops and citizens that no excuse will be allowed for any similar acts of violence. After the promulgation of this order and the further of to declare in the most explicit terms that any who may attempt the repetition of such acts should be punished if necessary by the rigors of the Articles of War. The course of has been pursued, and he fears will in some instance be the means of rendering doubtful and the goal of those who may have participated in the carnage. This course of proceedings dignified the rebellion and assassinate with the sacrifice of martyrdom and confound the difference that morally and religiously makes between the ruffian and the brave and the honorable. The editor of the Richmond Wiggles, or Richmond W. Hinks, also referred with pain to this feature of the Southampton Rebellion. We allude to the slaughter of many blacks without trial and under circumstance of great barbarity. He thought that about 40 had thus been killed, and Reverend G. W. Powell, writing August 27, when the reign of terror was by no means over-reported. Many Negroes are killed every day. The exact number will never be known. The Reverend gentleman was correct, but it appears certain that more and many more than 40 were massacred. The Huntsville, Alabama Southern Advocates of October 15, 1831 declared that over 100 Negroes had been killed in Southampton. It seems accurate to say that at least twice as many Negroes were indiscriminately slaughtered in that county as the number of white people who had fallen victim to the vengeance and bondage hating spirits of the slave, that some considered themselves martyrs their lives in such a cause. And a later to Judge Thomas Ruffin of North Carolina declared some of them that were wounded and in agonies of death declared that they was going happy for that God had a hand in what they had been doing. No. Nat Turner elude his pursuit from the end of August until October 30th. When he was caught armed only when an old sword by Benjamin Phillips And during those weeks, there had been rumor that he was caught, that he was a runaway in Maryland, that he was drowned, but as a matter of fact, he never left his native county. He forsook his hiding place only a night for water, having supplied himself with food. All right. Turner was tried and thought pleading not guilty, since, as he said, he did not feel guilty. He was condemned to hanging. And the Honorable Jeremiah Cobb pronounced sentencing on November the 5th in this word: the judgment of courts is that you be taken hence to the jail from whence you came thence to the place of execution. And on Friday next, between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., be hung by the neck until you are dead. Dead, dead, and may the Lord have mercy upon your soul. About 16 other slaves and 3 free Negroes had previously been executed, and on November the 11th, 1831, their leader, the prophet, he who had inspired them to value liberty upon life, went calmly to his death. Some of the first contemporary accounts of the revolts stated that it was led by about 3 whites, but these was later denied, and no good evidence have been seen to demonstrate that of any but Negroes were implicated in the uprising itself. There is, however, evidence of joint activities in the trouble and plots immediately following the outbreak. Governor Floyd of Virginia, in his legislative message on December 6, 1831, like a month later, darkly hinted that the unrest was not confined to the slave. The best evidence observed concerning this in Virginia is a semi-literal letter from a white person, William Manny, dated Chesterfield County, August 29, 1831, to a slave, Ben Lee, reading, "My old followers," by Ben. And this is what Ben said. You will tell acquaintance every servant in Richmond and adjoining counties, they all must be in strict readiness, that this occurrence will go through Virginia with the slaves and whites if there had never been an association, a visiting with free and slave. This would never have been. They are put up by free about their liberty or liberation. I wrote to Norfolk, Amila, Noteway, and to swell other counties to different slaves, but in Bill Miller, Bowler, John Ferguson, and Sobel, other free followers been at Dr. Crump's, and a great many gentlemen, servants, how they must act in getting their liberation. They must set a fare to the county or to the city, Richmond, beginning at Shokoe Hill, and then going though east, west, north, south, set fires to the bridges. They are about to break out in Gutland and in Mecklenburg and several other counties, ever short. Now there is a barber here, and this place tells that a Methodist of the name Edmund had put a great many servants up to how they should do and act by setting fires to this town. I do wish they may succeed by so doing. We poorly whites can get work as well as slaves or collared. This following Edmund, the Methodist said that Judge T.F. is no friend to the free of your Richmond Free Association, that your master Watkins, Lee, Buckenberry, Johnson, Taylor of Norfolk, and several other noble delegates is bitterly against them. All servants say that Billy Hickman has just put him up how to do to revenge the whites. Edmund said so. You all ought to get revenge. Every white in this place is scared or secreted except myself and a few others that Methodists have put up great many slaves in this place. What to do? I can tell you, so push on, boys, push on. Your friend Williamson Manny. And let me stop right here for a second. Besides what Miss Manny said, if you look at the other page, how they always try and tie in that most slaves during that time might have got some help from Europeans or white men of them time, is not really accurate from the readings. And it shows testament that they think that the slave or the Negro male at the time that cannot get organized back then, and maybe now, today's a little different, that he has the inclination to organize himself when he set his mind right to what he wants to attain and achieve. So it did prove evident when they try to find every outbreak, every revolt, they always find that they had to always go back to the source. Did these so-called slaves, these stupid brute animals, had help? Was there other Europeans plotting to kill other masters so that they could take their slaves and take their land and resource? That is what we call false, and it's not really true. All revolts from up to, it started beginning around 1600s to late 1800s, have proved evident most of all revolts were done by the minds and hands and thoughts of other Negro slaves and freedmen. So that dispels myth about, Europeans, plot helping these slaves get to where they get. So don't believe the hype when you see these movies depicting that there always is a great white hope helping black people, especially here in America back then, for anything that they're trying to attain from freedom, liberty. That's not the case. So that dispels that myth. And anybody else want to prove me wrong, you could always leave a comment and present other books. Some of the evidence pointed to whites participation or at least sympathies with the plot of slaves in North Carolina just after the Turner Rebellions exists. Thus, Mr. Nathan P. Whitfield of Union County wrote, the Governor Mountfront strokes on September 12, 1831, concerning serious troubles in Sampson and Dalton counties and of uneasiness in his own area leading to the mobilization of the militant. He added as a postscript, I am inclined to believe that the insurrectionary feeling generally disseminating among the blacks in the lower or eastern counties of the state. I have just learned, though I cannot rely on it, that these Moranders are assisted by some rationally whites. Later in September, the commander of militants of Hinds County, North Carolina, informed the governor that usual nights assembles of slaves had recently occurred. Excitement was great. Strong patrols were out every night, and a fresh supply of arms would be welcome. He added, however, that when it came to getting men for patrol duty, difficulties were encountered for. There are many of these counties who are quite refractionary and scarcely can be brought to do their turn of service, and their plea are that it is uncertain whether they shall get paid for their service, and that they have no slaves of their own. Therefore ought not to be interrupted about the slaves of others. Finally, a Baltimore publication reporting the plot of North Carolina added the Union or anonymous note that the extensive and organized plea to bring about this isolation and massacre, it may be awful believe, was not although confirmed to the slave, or altogether confirmed by the slave. With the news of this outbreak, panic flashed through Virginia. The uprising was infection, and slaves everywhere became restless, or at least it was believed that they had become restless, so that the terror monstrosity localized in Virginia spread up to Delaware and through Georgia, across the Louisiana and into Kentucky. This naturally led some to believe that Turner had concerned massacres for rebellions over a wider area than of his own county. This Governor Floyd wrote, "From all that has come to my knowledge during and since that the affairs, I am fully convinced that every black preacher in the whole county east of the Blue Ridge was in the secret of against and retaliation of the extent of the insurrection. I think it's greater than will ever appear." A few other contemporary statements of similar purports apparently, and some later writers have adopted the same viewpoint. The final authority of this question, however, is Nat Turner himself, and he affirms that the revolt he led was local, and that his activities have been confined to his own neighborhood. He added, "I see, sir, you doubt my word, but can you not," and the subtitles at the end of this, "think the same ideals of strange appearance about this time in the heavens might prompt others as well as myself to this undertaking?" In the absence of any evidence of equal weight to the contrary, one must conclude that Turner possessed the characteristics of a great leader, in that he sensed the mood and feelings of the masses, of his fellow beings, not only in his immediate environment, but generally. The years immediately preceding his efforts have been marked by a great rambling of discontent and protest. Tanner acts itself carrying that rambling to a high point caused an eruption throughout the length and breadth of the slave South, which always rested on a volcanic of outraged humanity. The Richmond Inquiry of August 26, 1831, while assuring the world that in its city there was no disturbance, no suspicion, no panic, did note the fact that a patrol turned out in our city every night. 2 days later, a resident of Richmond wrote to his New York friend,
that the question now arises: if the slave in that county would murder the whites, whether they are not ready to do it any other county in the state, and whether the reports that may spread among the slaves in other parts of the state may not excite these or excite those to insurrection that never thought of such a thing before. Somewhat later, a friend of prosecution wanted to know, or a friend of percussion wanted to know, how can a remedy be provided, the safety of our wives and children and their lives be preserved? These thoughts kept recurring, and together with the instant stream of other slaves' plots and outbursts deployed a truly feverish state of mind. A niece of George Washington declared, "It is like a smothering volcano. We know not when or where the flames will burst forth, but we know that death in the most horrid form threatens us. Some have died, others have become deranged from apprehension since the Southampton affairs, and a gentleman in Virginia wrote to an acquaintance in Cincinnati. These insurrections have alarmed my wife so as readily to endanger her health. I have not slept without anxiety in their months. Our nights are sometimes spent in listening to noise. A corn song or a hog call had often been the subject of nervousness, terror, and a cat in the dining rooms will banish sleep for the night. There was been, and there still is, a panic in all the country. I am beginning to lose my courage about the malnutrition of the South. Our rivals, producers, no preachers, church are like the buildings in which they worship, gone in a few years. There is no principle of life. Death is autocratic of slave regions. The Richmond Coupler of September 3rd, 1831, contains this paragraph, and it quotes: "Some rumors are still afloat, but we know not to what authorities they rest, and we hope they are very much exaggerated, as of a deposit of guns, pistols, and knives being found in Nansemount, though a late letter from the county says all armed alarms had subsided. Yet we now and then hear of a suspect slave taken up in Nansemount and Surrey, and we hear a report of a patrol going upon an estate in Prince George, and upon the overseers pointing out 5 whom he suspects shouted 2 or shooting 2 who were attempt to escape, and securing the other 3 and throwing them into jail." A little later were reports of the convictions of about 11 slaves in the 3 eastern counties of Nansemount, Prince George, and Sussex. Then came the arrest and subsequently release of 12 in Norfolk, and the conviction of one of the Fredericksburg, and the jailing of 40 more in Nansemount. And reports, no doubt greatly exaggerate, were current that 2,000 or 3,000 Negroes were hiding in the great Desmond swamps, which extend from Southampton into North Carolina. The entire manpower of the state, of much if not all, the military might infantry auxiliary cavalry, either in volunteer or regular militant units, were pressed into service throughout the tidewaters and the paramount areas, while the non-combatant population moved into garrisons. Fourth, or blockhouse. 2 slaves attempt to avoid arrest were shot and killed in Charles City County in September, and the next month several slaves imprisoned in Sussex attempt to escape. 1 succeeded, 1 was killed, another severely wounded, and the remainder were secured without injury. On Friday, October the 21st, 4 of them were hung. And the residents of Georgetown and Sussex, Delaware, and Easton and Seaford, Maryland, were panic-stricken, and slaves in these regions were arrested by the scores. And we will stop right here. So this is only chapter 12, section 1 of what we like to now call the Nat Turner or the Turner Cataclysm. I hope that you enjoyed this reading. Be sure to tune in to the next broadcast while we conclude chapter 12, section 2.